For the first time in 5 months, you could watch live Orioles baseball on your television this weekend. I'll give you the recap and everything you need to know from the Orioles' first 3 spring training games coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is Monday, February 23rd, 2026, and welcome back into the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb. And coming up on today's episode, we will recap the Orioles' first 3 games of their spring training season that happened this weekend. Some pitchers that stood out, some hitters that stood out, some notes on them all, and some roster moves, injury news, and everything we missed from the past 3 days. We will talk about Pete Alonso hitting some bombs, some nasty relievers we saw like Grant Wolfram and Cameron Foster, and the Orioles bringing back a player for a second time on waivers because, well, they might need another infielder with Jordan Westburg out. But that's all coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast, which is brought to you by FanDuel. Use your profit boost on an NBA future and get entered for your chance to win a trip to the NBA Finals. Play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. So the Orioles were playing baseball games, and 2 out of the 3 of them, Friday and Saturday, were on television. If you have MASN or if you have MASN Plus through streaming, you could watch the O's once again. And it's an exciting spring training because the Orioles will be broadcasting a all-time high 20 spring training games. Unfortunately, there's around 30 games, so you don't get all of them. Some of them, if you have a certain MLB TV package, that maybe the other team will be broadcasting on TV. That was not the case Sunday's game between the O's and the Tigers. There was just a radio broadcast. But arguably just as exciting, maybe a little less exciting, but still pretty exciting, as the Orioles doing 20 games on TV this spring, is for the first time here in Major League Baseball spring training in 2026, every single spring training park has publicly available StatCast data. It used to be there was just a handful of parks where you could get the StatCast data. Now, even if the game is not broadcasted on TV, you get the data for every single game. So there used to be spring training games, if you've been listening to this show with me for a while, where it was like, hey, there's no TV broadcast and no StatCast. We basically would not say a single thing about that game unless somebody got injured and we heard about it from the beat writers because there was nothing to talk about. Now there's even more to see. There's also even more data to look through from these games. So I'm going to do some pitcher notes, some hitter notes, some other news things from the spring training opening weekend for the Orioles, and it was just fun to have baseball back on. I will say probably by the end of the second game on Saturday afternoon, I was like, yeah, okay, this is spring training baseball. It's very exciting on day one because you've gone 5 months without watching it, and we get into early March and it really starts to get stale. Good thing there's a WBC this year. Good thing there was some Olympics still going on this weekend, but still exciting to see things happening. So let's start with pitching notes from the weekend. Whether you missed some of it, all of it, want to dive deeper, this is basically everything you missed that's important to what the Orioles want to do once they get to the regular season and games actually start to count. Let's begin with Trevor Rogers, who started the spring training opener on Friday. That doesn't mean he's going to be the Orioles opening day starter, but it is essentially down to either him or Kyle Bradish to get that nod on March 26th when the O's open the season. And Rogers, he looked like he was ready for the season to begin on Friday when he took the mound. 2 scoreless innings against the Yankees. It was mostly a AAA level lineup sent out there by New York. Like there was no Aaron Judge. Most of the stars were not out there, but hey, 2 scoreless innings, 1 hit, 3 walks or 3 Ks and no walks on 32 pitches. He got 8 whiffs, 5 on the 4-seam fastball. He's talked a little bit about adding a couple of ticks of velocity on his fastball this spring. He was sitting 93.1 miles an hour in his awesome 2025 season. When he was great in 2021 in his rookie year with the Marlins, he was 94.5. He still hasn't regained that fastball velo, but his average fastball was 92.9 on Friday. That's good stuff. That's just below where, it was last year. And what that tells me is, guys usually build up their velo a tick or two as spring training goes on. So if you're sitting 93 in your first spring training outing, you could easily be sitting 94 to 95 when the season starts. And the fact that in the second inning, he averaged 93.6 on his fastball. I mean, we could see a Trevor Rogers that's consistently throwing 94 plus miles an hour, which could even take him to a next level once we get to the regular season. There were also some significant movement changes in some of his pitches, like his sweeper had a lot more horizontal movement. Same with the sinker and the changeups we saw on Friday. Just something to monitor the next time he takes the mound at some point, maybe late this weekend. It could be just some weird first appearance of spring stuff where he's trying out some things. It'll take a couple of spring outings with this data to see if these are real changes he made to the movement profile of his pitches. But again, luckily, because we have this StatCast data on every single spring training game, we'll learn that a little bit sooner this spring. Now, one of the most impressive arms of the weekend was probably Grant Wolfram, who struck out the side in a scoreless inning on Friday, the one game he pitched in. He got 6 whiffs on 10 swings in his outing, was easily sitting 95 from the left side. The right-handed batters he faced were just absolutely clueless against his breaking balls. He threw both the slider and the curveball. Both have always graded out as great pitches. Remember, Wolfram came over in a small trade with the Brewers in April of last year, was kind of an up-down reliever for the Orioles. Had some really good stretches, some good stuff, also some command issues at times. But he is the highest upside left-handed reliever that the Orioles have. Now, there's a chance he doesn't make the opening day roster because guys like Keegan Aiken and Dietrich Enns, they are out of options. Wolfram has minor league options. He could go to AAA, but Wolfram has better stuff than those guys. He has a much higher upside and he's younger. I just think this is a chance for him to really break out and push his way onto this team if he keeps looking like this. He's going to need to pitch very well to beat out other guys who might not have those minor league options. But if he keeps looking like it did on Friday, Wolfram's going to be in this Oriole bullpen. Also saw some good stuff Friday from the O's number one pitching prospect. That is right-hander Trey Gibson, who threw the final 3 innings of the Orioles' 2-0 win on Friday. 3 scoreless, 2 hits, 3 Ks, no walks on just 35 pitches from Gibson. He flashed 5 pitches. We saw the sinker, slider, sweeper, cutter, and curveball. We did not see the 4-seam fastball. We saw 6 different pitches from him in AAA last year. Gibson's one big struggle he had when he got to Norfolk at the end of last season was he couldn't get the same amount of ride movement on his 4-seam fastball because you change actually the type of baseball you use. There's the minor league ball that you use up through AA, and then starting in AAA, you switch to the major league ball, which the seams are a little bit different, the ball's a little bit different, and some pitchers can really struggle with that jump, and Gibson just couldn't get the same ride on his fastball with the new ball. He's admitted that, and he did not throw a single 4-seamer in the 35 pitches he threw in his spring training debut on Friday. So that's something to monitor. He said after the game, and Andy Kusko's story in the Baltimore Banner, he still wants to throw that 4-seamer, just didn't feel right about it. Wasn't a good spot to throw it on Friday. The other pitches were great. That deathball, slider, curveball kind of combo pitch that he throws he threw some incredible ones on Friday. That thing is unbelievable. The breaking balls were great. He'll be in AAA to start the year, but there's a lot to like out of that debut, and if the O's need some more starters down the line this season, they are going to turn to Trey Gibson. We saw Dean Kramer Saturday. I'll kind of loop him in with seeing Kyle Bradish Sunday. Those were the next 2 starters. Like, Dean Kramer walked 3 batters in the second inning, but he threw 2 innings, 39 pitches, and was healthy. That's what you want to see. No real changes in the stuff there. StatCast was calling his splitter a changeup, but the velo and the movement looked the same as last year, so I think it's the same pitch. We also saw Kyle Bradish for 2 innings on Sunday. He gave up a handful of runs as well, but again, he went out there and he was healthy and came out of the game after 2 innings. He was sitting 94.6 up to 95 plus with the fastball. He was 94.8 on average in the regular season last year with that fastball. He was 95.3 miles an hour in 2024. So definitely a good spot with velocity for Bradish in his first outing. Could even tick up closer to 96 once we get to the regular season. He threw a lot of sliders as well, which was always good to see. But I really do think we're kind of watching the relievers more than we're watching the starters. Like, there's just way less questions about the state of the rotation among the guys who are here. So the other relievers that I think showed me something over the weekend, Yennier Cano, he's throwing a much softer cutter. He tried one for a while last year that was 92 miles an hour. He threw cutters that sat at 86 miles an hour in his outing on Saturday. And you could say, oh, Connor, isn't that just his slider maybe being miscategorized? That's what I thought at first. But StatCast actually split the pitches he threw on Saturday. They said he threw 3 cutters and 3 sliders, and you could tell they were different pitches because the slider was at 84. It had much more horizontal movement, whereas the cutter was at 86 and much less movement. They were clearly 2 different pitches, so we'll see if that's something new for Cano. Noticeably, he didn't throw a single changeup, or he did not throw that new splitter that he debuted in August of last year that kind of revamped his repertoire a little bit and made him pitch better right at the end of the season. We'll see with that one. I hope either the changeup or the splitter is still in the mix for him. Dietrich Enns certainly had a spring training opening outing to forget on Saturday. He got 1 out and gave up 6 runs. You don't really care about what the stats look like, especially in your first outing. What was intriguing was StatCast had him throwing a slider and not throwing a cutter. My big gripe with Enns last year when he came over to the O's, despite having a really good final 2 months and setting himself up in a spot to be in the Orioles 2026 opening day bullpen, is that he was actually a lefty who was much, much better against right-handed hitters. He was kind of a reverse splits pitcher, and that's great, especially when you're a guy who wants to throw multiple innings like Enns does. It allows you to go through the lineup once, get the lefties out, get the righties out. But specifically with what the Orioles need in their bullpen right now is probably a lefty who can get left-handed hitters out. And both Aiken and Enns are both arguably better against right-handed hitters than they are against lefties. And I just thought Enns needed a sort of pitch that he could target lefties with, right? He had a cutter, he had a curveball, he had a 4-seam fastball. All those pitches were really good against righties. Lefties crushed them all. So I thought you got to add a slider this offseason. And StatCast had him throwing a slider in his outing against the Pirates on Saturday. Now, you're not going to love the outing because he gave up so many runs. Our old friend Ryan O'Hearn hit a 3-run shot off of him. But if this slider is a little bit different than the cutter, and it seems like it was a little bit slower velo-wise. It had more horizontal run than the 2025 cutter he threw. Maybe it is, and I think it might be, a new pitch that he added. Now, he's still going to be working on it throughout the spring, but that was something he absolutely needed. So I think the positive to take out of that outing is he made a change in the offseason that was pretty necessary for Enns to keep helping this team. Yaramil Hiraldo, another absolute standout from the weekend on Saturday. His fastball was up to 96.2 miles an hour. That was a pitch that sat in the high 94 miles an hour last year. That velo bump for Hiraldo with the incredible induced vertical break, the incredible ride he gets on that 4-seamer could be huge for him. I've talked about Hiraldo a lot this offseason. It's a good fastball. It's a devastating changeup. It's a pretty solid slider as well. He kind of is, he's basically a miniature version of Felix Bautista. It's a similar delivery. It's a similar mix. He's just much smaller and throws much softer. But when Hiraldo was 94, that's a little different than Hiraldo at 96, what we saw. 96 with that kind of movement could be a little bit closer actually to what Felix Bautista is. That is very exciting and something to monitor moving forward. Chase McDermott, we saw mostly strikes from him. We know he's, for the first time in spring, going to be in a full-time bullpen role for the Orioles. He was 96 to 97 with 19 inches of induced vertical break. That is an elite fastball we saw from Chase. He mostly threw strikes. The command was good. He got out of a clean inning. That was awesome to see. He'll be in the bullpen mix. Levi Wells, pitching prospect for the O's, was at 97 with huge ride at the end of Saturday's game. He's flashed 5 pitches. He'll be in the Norfolk rotation to begin the year, but Wells is a guy where the stuff is so good that if the O's in the second half of this season just need somebody to come up and be a reliever, they could pretty easily call on Wells, and I think he would thrive in that role. We saw Tyler Wells, speaking of Wells, guys, we saw Tyler Wells pitch just 1 inning. On Saturday, he came in after Dean Kramer. Now, Mike Elias has said that Wells will be built up as a starter this spring, which, even though there's no space for him in the rotation right now, makes sense. If you build him up as a starter, you can always just throw him in the bullpen when the season starts and still have him as starter depth. If you build him up as a reliever and then you, for some reason, need him as a starter because there's injuries, well, he's not built up. So it was intriguing that he only threw 1 inning and 13 pitches in his spring training outing Saturday. If he doesn't throw 2+ innings in his next outing, that tells me that the Orioles actually kind of changed course and are just going to build him up fully as a reliever. I don't think that would be smart. I think it's smarter to use him as a starter. But they also have a lot of guys that they're trying to do with there, and there's only so many games, so I'll be interested to see like what Wells is doing on the backfields, what he's throwing in the bullpen after games, what he's doing in simulated games on the backfields. Like that's what Shane Baz has done so far, just hasn't pitched in a game yet. So that will be something to monitor with him. And then the last guy to talk about pitching wise, I mean, the wow factor arm from Sunday's game, I mean, has to be what we saw, or didn't see, but what we saw from StatCast, or maybe you heard on the radio if you were listening, from Cameron Foster. How about that? Cameron Foster, right-handed reliever. He'll be 27 in March, so he's a little bit older. Came over in the Gregory Soto trade with the Mets at last year's deadline. Orioles added him to the 40-man roster this offseason to protect him from the Rule 5 draft, so we knew he'd be in big league camp. He's got more of an outside chance. More than likely, he will begin the year in the Tide's bullpen in AAA, but he's going to be a piece for this team at some point this year. Now, we didn't see really at all the curveball or the slider on Sunday from Foster. We saw one inning in the game, and it was basically all fastball cutter of the 16 pitches that he threw. But the fastball cutter combo was devastating from Cameron Foster. Four-seam fastball was sitting at 96. 97.7 was the hardest pitch he threw with a ton of vertical movement. Then the cutter was at 87. That thing moved pretty well. It was a very enticing pitch, it seemed, at least metrically. Foster's a guy who, I mean, he was sitting 95 with his four-seamer last year. He was up to almost 98 in his first spring outing. Now, velo building for relievers happens a little quicker in spring than starters, so I don't think Foster will build even more on that. It could have been the, amped up with the juices flowing in your first spring training with the Orioles, but the cutter got swing and miss. The fastball moved like crazy. That is a very, very interesting bullpen arm to watch for the Orioles this season. Those are the pitching notes, though. They're just for me. There's always going to be more pitching notes than hitting notes when we talk about those spring training games, but I do not want to leave the hitters hanging. Kobe Mayo played a lot of third base. That was good to see. We got some fun home runs from Heston Kjerstad and Pete Alonso. Hitting notes from the first weekend are coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. Ever wanted to experience the NBA Finals live and in person? FanDuel is giving you the chance to turn that dream into reality with their NBA sweepstakes. Here's how it works. Just use your profit boost on any NBA future, and you'll automatically be entered for a shot to win an NBA Finals trip for two. That's right, flights, tickets, the whole experience. And futures are great this time of year. You can pick a team to win the championship, grab a conference title. It's that extra layer of excitement to every game down the stretch. And visit FanDuel.com to get started. Use your profit boost on an NBA future and get entered for your chance to win a trip to the NBA Finals. Play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. So we are on to the hitter notes for the Orioles from their first three spring training games of 2026 played over the weekend. And I think if you are talking hitter notes, you got to begin with Pete Alonso, who homered in both games he played in, Friday and Sunday. Wanted to stay in for one final AB on Friday and hit a moonshot to left field, then crushed one even harder and even further on the road in Lakeland against the Tigers on Sunday. All the reports are he's been on the top step. He's been encouraging teammates, been doing it throughout spring, even before the game started. So it's been an A+++ addition of Pete Alonso to this team so far. Kobe Mayo, the two games he played in Friday and Sunday, started defensively at third base at both of those games. That is important. Of course, with Jordan Westburg out, we know he's going to miss at least all of April and more than likely more than that this season with the partial tear of his UCL and the PRP injection he's getting. More on that Westburg injury news back on Friday's episode to check out if you haven't listened or watched that one already. Mayo did hit a ball hard at the plate, 109 off the bat, but it did turn into a double play. That was the hardest hit ball of the day on Friday. Didn't get a lot of defensive chances Friday, but we did get a video of him making a nice charging and running throw to get an out on an infield dribbler from our old friend Austin Slater in the game on Sunday, so that was good. I'm going to need to see a lot from Mayo for me to trust him defensively at third base, but he is certainly going to get the innings and the chances out there to do it here this spring. And even though I don't believe in his defense, I still believe he's the front runner to start at third base for the Orioles on opening day with both Holiday and Westburg beginning the year on the injured list. So we'll just kind of see how that works out. In that same vein, Jeremiah Jackson got the start at second base in Friday's game, which was a little bit interesting to see. He played just one inning there in 2025, but he started there Friday, and then he started there on Sunday as well with Mayo at third base also in that game. So maybe the Orioles playing their hand a little bit. Again, Blaze Alexander started the Saturday game. He didn't start on Friday or Sunday. My assumption has been that Alexander will be the opening day starting second baseman. That's where he started the game on Saturday. But to get Jeremiah Jackson 2 games there where he didn't play there a whole ton last year, I think they're trying to give Jackson some runway to make the opening day roster. Again, if Holiday and Westberg are going to be out, there's chances for Alexander, but there's also chances for Mayo and someone like Jeremiah Jackson. And if Jackson can show some better infield defense than he showed us last season, what he did with the bat was better last year than any of these other options, better than what Mayo did, better than Alexander or Luis Vasquez or Weston Wilson or any of these guys. I mean, yes, it was only 2 months, but Jeremiah Jackson had the best offensive stats out of any of them. So, hopefully we get to see some more of him at second and third base, and maybe he's even more firmly in the mix to make this team out of camp. Speaking of Blaze Alexander, had a single in his first AB on Saturday, 110 off the bat exit velocity. Hardest hit ball of his big league career is 110.7, so nice to see him come off the jump and do that. He did hit a ball 114 in AAA last year. We know he can hit the ball hard, but that was definitely cool to see. Ryan Mountcastle hit a couple balls hard, had a line out and a double on Friday. Both balls hit over 100 miles an hour. That was Saturday's game. But I just really think with the injuries, like Ryan Mountcastle is pretty much a lock to make this team. It's been an odd offseason with him still here, but with the injuries and Mayo moving back to third, Mountcastle is going to be a bench bat, platoon bat, pinch hitter, at least until Jackson Holiday's back, and then we'll kind of see what happens there. But he's going to be on the team, so it is good to see him having success, at least early in spring. Our early front runner, I think, for the Jake Fox Award, which is, of course, given to the random player who has a great spring training and may never do anything else, as I'm sure you've been hearing about on other Orioles podcasts, Bird's Eye View and Orioles on the Verge, talking about the Jake Fox Award. It's got to be Sam Huff so far, right? He did go 0 for 3. He started behind the dish on Sunday. He's a kind of a third catcher Orioles brought in on a minor league deal this offseason, but he did come into the game replacing Samuel Basayo late in the game on Friday, and he went 2 for 2 with 2 doubles. So that's a good offensive start for Sam Huff, including one at 107 off the bat. I guess if they really did want to carry a third catcher on this team with Basayo and Rutschman, Sam Huff would be that guy. I highly doubt that's going to happen, but nice to see him swing the bat a couple times. And then for my money, the most encouraging swing we saw all weekend was in the first inning on Sunday. And unfortunately, we didn't get to see it live. Orioles did post a video of it afterwards. Heston Kjerstad with a solo home run off of our old friend Jack Flaherty in Sunday's game. Hit it over 100 off the bat, traveled 400 feet out to right center field. It was kind of a low and in slider. It was in the strike zone, but he scooped it, turned on it, and launched it out of the ballpark. There's been some loud sounds and videos of him from live BPs against Orioles pitchers early in spring, crushing the ball over the fence. Now to see him do it against a legitimate top line-ish, at least starting pitcher in Jack Flaherty in a spring training game was awesome to see. If Heston Kjerstad lit the world on fire in Sarasota in February and March, how would he fit on the opening day roster? I don't know. But with Holiday and Westberg out, you have a better chance of just putting the best 13 bats on the roster as long as you can fill all 8 defensive positions every night. So there could be space for Kjerstad. If you wanted to DFA Ryan Mountcastle, there'd be even more space for Kjerstad, but that makes it a little tougher because Heston does have minor league options and Mountie does not. But him swinging it and being healthy with the other injuries we've seen so far and the presumed injury at some point of Tyler O'Neill would just be huge, not just for the Orioles, but for Kjerstad. And that was definitely really, really cool to see. Other news and notes from the weekend, roster moves, injuries, other things to get to finish out the show coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by Indeed. Workplace chaos, deadline stacking up, inbox overflowing, and the one person you have to fill, the one position you have to fill, still sitting open. When the pressure's on and you need the right hire, this is a job for sponsored jobs. Indeed Sponsored Jobs helps you reach the people who actually fit what you're looking for. Skills, experience, location. So you're not just hoping the right candidate stumbles across your post. And here's a stat that says it all. In the minute I've been talking to you, companies like yours made 27 hires on Indeed, according to Indeed data worldwide. So if you're hiring, spend less time searching and more time interviewing candidates who check all your boxes with Indeed Sponsored Jobs. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to help get your job the premium status it deserves at Indeed.com/podcast. Again, that's Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? This is a job for Indeed. Sponsored jobs. So to some news and notes from the weekend to finish out today's show. We start with a roster move the Orioles made as they have reclaimed infielder Brian Ramos off waivers from the St. Louis Cardinals late last week. The Orioles initially got Brian Ramos in a small trade. It was kind of a glorified waiver claim with some cash sent to the White Sox when he is DFA'd by Chicago earlier this offseason. They then tried to sneak him through waivers, get him off the 40-man roster, and keep him in the organization like they did with guys like John Kenzie Noel and Weston Wilson earlier this offseason. But Ramos was claimed by the Cardinals. He's a 23-year-old right-handed hitting infielder, been a really good defensive third baseman, former pretty good prospect in the White Sox system who did debut a couple of years ago. Really hasn't been good with the bat since getting to AAA in 2024, but his underlying numbers aren't bad. Scouts like the approach, just kind of, a hole in his swing. He struck out a little bit too much. The big issue is he is out of minor league options, so the Cardinals, after making another move, then DFA'd Ramos, and the Orioles, now with the worst injury news about Jordan Westburg, claimed Ramos right back. I'll be honest with you, it's a little tough for Ramos because more than likely, at some point in the next couple of weeks, the Orioles are probably going to DFA Brian Ramos for the second time this offseason and hope this time he clears waivers and stays in the Orioles organization just off the 40-man roster. But I would argue that if Ramos is as good defensively at third base as some of the scouting reports from the minor leagues say, and I'd like to see it with my own eyes in some spring training games before I make a personal decision, he's probably a better option to roster than Luis Vasquez. Because I've made the argument that now that we know that both Jackson Holliday and Jordan Westburg are going to begin the year on the injured list, I've argued that Blaze Alexander is your starting second baseman and Kobe Mayo is your starting third baseman. Now, a lot of people have argued, okay, then also put Jeremiah Jackson on the roster because it gives you one more roster spot. But I would make the argument I'd actually rather start Jeremiah Jackson in AAA and put Luis Vasquez on the roster. Because if you're going to start Kobe Mayo at third base with all the defensive questions we know he has over there, I'd rather his backup be the best infield defender possible that you have. And that answer is pretty easily Luis Vasquez. He's very, very good defensively at all three infield positions. There's just not a lot of bat there. If Brian Ramos is as good as the scouts say, at least at third base defensively, with a much higher ceiling bat than Luis Vasquez gives you, there is a situation here where if the O's can hold him, Brian Ramos has a path to making the Orioles opening day roster. And you think that makes sense. If the Orioles claim a guy on waivers twice in one offseason, there's probably something they like about him enough where they could see him being on their roster. And there's a serious opening for Ramos now. So I'll be intrigued to see if he stays on the 40-man or not. But if that defense is good enough, I'd take his defense then way over Jeremiah Jackson. I'd take his bat over Luis Vasquez. I think I'd roster him behind Kobe Mayo. Now, I'd just DFA him when Jackson Holliday gets back 2 or 3 weeks into the season. But there's a path there for someone like Brian Ramos. There is certainly a path. Now, there was always the other option that I talked about Friday where the Orioles could go outside the organization and bring in another third base option. And the one that made the most sense was our old friend Ramon Urias because he was still sitting out there as a free agent. Well, that changed this weekend. Urias signing a 1-year, $2 million major league deal with the St. Louis Cardinals. Funny enough, the Cardinals were the team that initially signed him out of the Mexican League. He was in the minors with the Cardinals before they DFA'd him in 2020, and the Orioles claimed him and got him to the big leagues for his debut that year and became one of the best waiver claims, maybe the best waiver claim of the Mike Elias era with the production he gave the Orioles. Urias did in his 6 years in Baltimore. Thought maybe it would make sense that, hey, you bring Urias in, he gives you, a nice floor to have at third base while you give the job somewhat to Kobe Mayo. You maybe split time between the two. Then when Jackson Holliday comes back, you reassess where you're at with Mayo and Urias and others. But Urias clearly saw kind of a longer-term path to playing time in the big leagues in St. Louis. Got a major league deal there as well. Obviously wish him the best with the Cardinals. But that means unless the O's make a big trade, like if they're really going to go and get an Isaac Paredes or something, which I talked about a little bit on Friday, like it's Mayo's job. And Jeremiah Jackson, Weston Wilson, and Brian Ramos are going to be in the mix, but it is Mayo's job to lose at the moment. So all eyes are going to be on him this spring training. Final thing is an injury update. Minor league reliever Keegan Gillies, Mike Elias said last week, has a severe quad injury. He's going to be out for at least 6 weeks. Gillies was a non-roster invitee to big league spring training. He was not going to make the team, more than likely was set to begin the year in the AAA Norfolk Tides bullpen. Got a big fastball, solid command, was fantastic in AA last year, had some struggles when he got to AAA for the first time, but figured it out by the end of the season. Overall, been a good reliever, but he's now 28 years old and, he's getting past that kind of prospect status. I think he'll pitch in the big leagues at some point with the O's or not. We'll see. It's good stuff. He's also a former guest of the Locked On Orioles podcast. We are big fans of Keegan Gillies out here, but seems as if his season is going to begin on the injured list, and that's a tough break for him after getting a chance to be in camp. And while it was an outside chance, there is openings in that bullpen, and he's not really going to get a chance to win one of them now with that quad injury. That'll do it for today's episode. Just getting you some news and notes from spring training. And there's definitely going to be episodes like that throughout the spring where we're not going to dive super deep into the outcomes of these games, who wins or loses. It's going to be more about some of the data, some of the video that we see come out of these games, what looks good from some relievers, some hitters who are in the mix for opening day, are on the roster bubble. How are they trying to separate themselves, if they can at all, while the Orioles are in Sarasota? So expect that a little bit more with some other episodes mixed in as we go through spring training baseball and baseball on our TVs. However, a couple of days here without some televised games, so I'll get you as much as I can for those. We will be back tomorrow as the Orioles do play a spring training game today. Unfortunately, it is once again not televised, but there will be StatCast data. It is the Orioles and the Braves at 1 o'clock. Cade Povich making his spring training debut in this one. So on tomorrow's episode, I'll talk a little bit about that. We'll dive a little bit deeper into PRP injections for position players. What kind of history can we look back on when it comes to Jordan Westberg's recovery and why he could be back maybe a little bit sooner than I would have expected, with some success stories with the PRP for position players. And then also, we're doing our first spring training mailbag episode on Wednesday. So if you have mailbag questions to get answered on that show, please email me lockedonorioles@gmail.com or leave them right here in the comments section, and make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to the Locked On Orioles YouTube channel. Leave a 5-star rating and a review wherever you listen to the show, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. And if you're liking Locked On Orioles, you can always join the Everydayer Club. You can get ad-free episodes of the show. You can get exclusive access to our members-only Discord channel to talk Orioles with me and other O's fans. And you can get so much more. It's just $5 a month or $50 a year. But for a limited time, for the next week, if you sign up for the Everydayer Club and use the code SPRING, that is code SPRING in all caps, you can get 1 free month of the Locked On Orioles Everydayer Club to kind of check it out for the month before opening day to see if you like it. Hopefully you do, and you stick around for the rest of the season. But I'll be back tomorrow. Until then, I'm Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.